What if the very tools meant to cripple Russia's economy actually fueled an unprecedented counterattack? The West unleashed sanctions, aiming to cripple Russia's oil exports, believing it would swiftly drain funds from Vladimir Putin's military ambitions in Ukraine. Yet, as the measures rolled out, Russia continued to sell oil, defying expectations. However, a shift was brewing, one that would turn the tables. Ukraine's innovative tactic, dubbed flying sanctions, was about to unfold. In this narrative of warfare and strategy, flying sanctions refer to Ukraine's long-range drones, which have been mercilessly targeting Russian oil refineries. Throughout August, these aerial assaults increased in frequency, linking them to a larger strategy aimed at truncating Russia's military fuel supply. Not only was this fuel essential for the operation of tanks and armored vehicles, but it also represented a financial lifeline for Russia's economy. With each drone launched, Ukraine aimed to shrink that vital resource and, consequently, Russia's war capabilities. Our story takes us to the Saratov region, nestled on the banks of the Volga River. Renowned for its wealth and natural resources, this area houses critical industrial plants, including a key oil refinery crucial for both the military and civilian fuel needs. What unfolds here is a clash not just of weapons but ideologies, as Ukraine zeroes in on the Kuibyshev refinery owned by Rosneft, located just south of the city of Samara. On August 31, Ukraine executed a decisive strike, targeting the very structures that refine oil. Upon hearing Russia's claims of a thwarted attack, every drone shot down, minor damage sustained, one must ponder, could this be a case of misrepresentation? Time and again, this narrative is echoed. Ukraine's drones hit their marks only to be dismissed as mere collateral damage. However, as the online buzz from locals in Samara erupted with images of explosions and flames, it became clear that this was no mundane operation. Verification came more than a week later, as satellite images revealed the aftermath: extensive fire and damage to the refinery's critical structure. 2 oil reservoirs blazed, forcing the refinery offline. August proved a pivotal month, leaving a significant dent in Russia's oil production capabilities. But beyond the immediate damage to infrastructure lies a more profound consequence. The Kuibyshev refinery, when operational, could process about 7 million tons of oil annually, translating to a significant portion of Russia's refining capacity. As reports surfaced of severe diesel shortages in Samara, residents found themselves grappling with empty gas pumps. What's worse, fuel distribution companies like GP Vimpel declared an inability to deliver fuel due to unforeseen developments that culminated in exploded oil facilities. Such disruption did not solely affect the supply chain, it posed a stark question to the Russian leadership: does the military consume what little fuel remains, or do they prioritize the needs of their citizens? Against the backdrop of ongoing conflict, this dilemma would haunt President Putin as the war reached an impasse. The ramifications were reverberating beyond Samara. Echoes of fuel shortages were being felt across Russia, causing unrest. As the situation escalated, the essence of the struggle became clear: the Ukrainian strategy wasn't just about military strikes, it embodied a fight for survival and autonomy against the looming presence of a powerful neighbor. As Ukraine's flying sanctions continue to yield results, the metaphorical and literal impact of their strategy casts a long shadow over Russia, unraveling not just their military supply but the very fabric of the nation's economic stability. What kind of future awaits when the very source of strength, fuel, is depleted? As we delve deeper into the story, a startling reality emerges: the fight is not only for victory in Ukraine but sparks a broader awakening among Russian society, reflecting on the costs of war. Each drone that flies symbolizes hope for change, igniting thoughts of resistance within a population yearning for peace. How long can the status quo hold with its citizens at the brink of energy collapse? The answer lies on the horizon, and it may be more explosive than anything experienced yet. In August, Ukraine launched a series of attacks targeting a key oil refinery in the Saratov region. This refinery, vital to Russia's war efforts and the domestic fuel supply, faced relentless strikes as Ukraine honed in on a single critical facility. The heart of their strategy was to weaken Russia's reliance on oil, its lifeline in the ongoing conflict. On August 31, the culmination of these efforts came with a drone assault on the Kuibyshev oil refinery, owned by Rosneft, situated just south of the bustling city of Samara. Ukrainian drones, known for their precision, targeted essential cracking towers for oil distillation and crucial oil reservoirs. Russia declared the attack a failure, insisting that all drones were intercepted and that only minor damage occurred due to falling debris. Yet, this narrative quickly fell apart. Social media exploded with posts of fiery explosions and billowing smoke, painting a different picture. The European Pleiades satellite corroborated these claims, capturing dramatic imagery of flames engulfing the refinery. As a result, the Kuibyshev facility was rendered fully operational. Conclusively, this incident epitomized Ukraine's tactical victory, showcasing their capacity to disrupt Russian oil production. The ramifications of this assault extend far beyond mere infrastructure damage, they ripple through everyday life in Russia. With Kuibyshev offline, the flow of fuel to consumers in the surrounding regions drastically diminished. In the affluent city of Samara, residents faced a grim reality as diesel shortages unfolded, leaving gas stations deserted and the air thick with the scent of frustration. How is it that a drone strike can transform the fate of an entire region? As the queues for fuel grew longer, the chilling realization settled in: the disruption wasn't just felt at the front lines. Russia's supply of refined oil dwindled dangerously, leading to consequences that could alter the dynamics of the war. The echoes of discontent grew louder, whispering through the lanes of Samara and beyond. But, would this ripple effect change in the Kremlin, or would it entrench their resolve even more? As shortages intensified, Russia grappled with the decision that lay ahead. Should they prioritize military needs or cater to the cries of their citizens? Amid this turmoil, the truth behind the effectiveness of Ukraine's flying sanctions started to unfold, revealing a substantially weakened Russian oil infrastructure. This was more than strategic, it was a strike at the very heart of Russia's capabilities, pulling the lever on a bigger game of survival. And yet, the most intriguing question looms: what will be the long-term outcome for the citizens caught in this fierce battle, and how will they navigate the tensions brewing within their own borders? Previously, we saw how Ukraine's drone strikes targeted the Kuibyshev refinery's oil reservoirs and cracking towers, forcing it offline completely, along with several other refineries throughout August. At first glance, this might seem like just another routine attack, but beneath the surface lies a far more profound story. This refinery is no ordinary facility. When running at full tilt, Kuibyshev processes about 7 million tons of oil yearly, that's around 140,000 barrels a day. This represents roughly 2.5% of Russia's entire oil refining capacity. That may sound like a small slice, but in reality, it's a critical pillar supporting Russia's fuel supply and revenue. Nearby, in the relatively affluent region of Samara, home to about 3.3 million people, the consequences of these relentless flying sanctions are hitting hard. It's not just the acrid smell of burning oil or the sight of billowing black smoke that unsettles locals. The real threat is invisible yet devastating: a widespread shortage of diesel and gasoline. Many fueling stations have run dry of 92 and 95 octane gasoline. This scarcity isn't accidental. It's the result of a grim tug-of-war between Ukraine's relentless campaign and Russia's faltering distribution networks. GP Vimpel, one of Russia's dominant fuel distributors in the Saratov district and nearby areas, recently announced that their trucks could no longer deliver fuel to hundreds of local wholesalers and gas stations. Their reason? Developments arising from unavoidable conditions. What these conditions really mean are the explosions, fires, and damage to refineries caused by Ukraine's drone strikes. Faced with dwindling refined oil, Russia is forced to make brutal choices. Should the limited fuel go to military forces or to ordinary citizens? Putin's war machine still demands fuel to keep rolling, but with refineries ablaze and supply lines choked, the average Russian feels the harsh squeeze. The fuel pumps run dry in Samara as the stakes grow ever higher. What happens next when the lifeblood of Russia's machinery and daily life begins to fade? Will the fuel shortages break the home front, or will the Kremlin find a way to keep the engines running? The answer lies just beyond the horizon, where the next wave of flying sanctions is already taking flight. Previously, we saw how Ukraine's relentless flying sanctions forced Russia's oil distributors into an impossible choice: supply fuel to the military or the Russian people. Now, as Putin's war drags on, only one option prevails, and ordinary Russians are feeling the harsh consequences. Just as Ukraine intended. The struggle in Samara mirrors a larger crisis spreading across Russia. fuel shortages have become routine, both inside the country and in occupied territories. According to a recent report from The Economist, these drone strikes have reduced up to 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity, delivering a crippling blow. In fact, nearly 40% of Ukraine's long-range strikes in 2025 targeted oil refineries. The damage? Over 1 million barrels of gasoline and diesel wiped out daily. That's not just a statistic, it's a nationwide disruption. Picture countless gas stations drying up, pumps clicking empty amid long, anxious queues that snake through Russian cities. Drivers stare at price tags skyrocketing by 54% since the start of the year, while their wallets tighten. The fuel shortage is both a supply nightmare and a financial storm, relentlessly driving prices higher with no relief in sight. Behind this crisis is a staggering economic toll. For the first 7 months of 2025, Russia's state deficit ballooned to a jaw-dropping $61.4 billion. The lost revenue from fewer oil products to export means Russia is bleeding billions, money desperately needed to fund its war effort. The West hoped their sanctions would bring Russia's economy to its knees. But it's Ukraine's innovative drone campaign that is delivering the knockout blows. Is this the turning point where Russia's oil empire begins to crumble from within? With everyday Russians paying the price, the question remains, how long can Putin's war machine keep running when the fuel that feeds it is burning away in flames? Previously, we saw that Russia's budget crisis worsens as it can't sell enough oil products to fund its war effort. Western sanctions fail to starve Russia's oil trade, but Ukraine's flying sanctions are finally tipping the scales. Now, let's explore how these drone strikes aren't just hurting Russia's economy, they're hitting its occupied territories too. Russia insists these fuel shortages at home are necessary sacrifices. They claim it's for the soldiers on the front lines, to keep war vehicles moving and defenses strong in Ukraine. But here's the shocking truth, even the troops aren't receiving the refined oil they desperately need. On September 1st, a major report revealed a grim new reality. Ukraine's drone attacks on oil refineries have grown so relentless, fuel supplies are vanishing not only in Russian cities but deep inside territories Russia occupies. Picture Luhansk, a region Russia says it controls almost entirely. Across this war-torn area, fuel stations stand barren, AI-92 and AI-95 gasoline pumps empty, leaving lines of hundreds waiting in vain. Images from social media and tracking data prove it, the queues are real. The so-called Luhansk Ministry of Fuel and Energy claims supply disturbances, drained reserves, and a sudden spike in demand as causes. In other words, Ukraine's drones are destroying every drop of refined oil that should reach this region. The consequences ripple further still. Occupied Crimea and Zabaykalsky Krai face similar crises. Authorities here have started rationing fuel, evoking a haunting echo of Soviet-era shortages. The Kuril Islands and Primorai, a vast expanse of the Russian Far East, are running dangerously low on fuel. Far to the east, thousands of miles away, Khabarovsk and coastal districts along the Pacific Ocean report scarce petrol supplies and lengthening queues. Even remote port cities like Venino and Sovetskaya Gavin, those gateways to the Sea of Japan, struggle with fuel scarcity. This isn't a one-off incident caused by one strike in Samara. It's a widespread, orchestrated campaign hitting Russia's lifelines from east to west. Imagine the acrid smell of burning oil hanging in the air after a refinery fire. Hear the crackling of distant explosions, the tense whispers of local residents as they face empty pumps. The drilling reality gnaws at citizens and soldiers alike. Russia's oil might be burning up in flames rather than fueling its war machine. The question lingers, if fuel runs out both at home and on the front lines, how long can Russia truly sustain its battle for Ukraine? Will the flying sanctions be the sting that finally breaks the backbone of this war effort? The next chapter will unravel the devastating consequences still to come. In the gripping narrative of an unexpected confrontation, the tides of conflict shift as Ukraine takes the reins of a high-stakes battle against Russia's oil empire. The West believed their sanctions would cripple Russia's oil industry, thwarting Vladimir Putin's ambitions in Ukraine. But reality defies expectations as Ukraine launches a series of drone strikes dubbed flying sanctions, targeting key oil refineries and transforming the battlefield. What if Ukraine's drones are the key to unraveling Russia's war machine? Taking aim at the vital Kuibyshev oil refinery in Saratov, Ukraine initiates a cascade of destruction through long-range drone assaults. On August 31, the final strike of the month aimed for critical cracking towers vital for oil processing. Commentators expected it would fail, given Russia's claims of merely minor damage from debris. But the truth was far different. Eyewitness accounts from Samara ignited social media with images of roaring flames and plumes of thick black smoke, the unmistakable signs of a successful strike. The stakes rise as satellite imagery confirms devastation, revealing substantial damage to the refinery's infrastructure. Before Ukraine's offensive, the Kuibyshev refinery processed an impressive 7 million tons of crude oil each year, a staggering 140,000 barrels a day. This represented about 2.5% of Russia's total refining capacity, a crucial lifeline for the war effort. Yet, in the wake of the drone strikes, the repercussions were severe. Fuel supplies began dwindling in nearby Samara, a city populated by 3.3 million residents, signaling a shift in everyday realities. But could this be just the beginning of an unprecedented fuel crisis? As residents lined up at stations, the ominous reality settled in: diesel fuel was vanishing. With the scarcity of gasoline evident across the region, fears grew. GP Vimpel, a major fuel distributor, announced it could no longer supply its customers due to unavoidable conditions, a euphemism for the destruction wreaked by Ukraine's drones. With the threat looming that resources would be diverted to sustain the military's operations, everyday Russians now grappled with an unsettling question: would they or their soldiers receive the fuel they desperately needed? As the last embers of August flickered out, the situation grew dire. Shortages echoed from Samara to the far reaches of Luhansk, where Russia claims near-total control. Fuel pumps lay dry, and long lines formed as residents waited anxiously for scant shipments. What began as a localized attack spiraled into a nationwide crisis. The constraints on supply raised alarm bells throughout Russia. Could Ukraine's strategy of flying sanctions bring Russia to its knees? As reports of empty gas pumps flooded in, Ukraine's tactics became clear: a systematic dismantling of Russia's oil capability. Satellite tracking revealed that up to 20% of oil refining capacity had been impacted due to Ukraine's relentless strikes. Meanwhile, the economic ramifications of these attacks echoed fiercely across Russia, raising prices and triggering a spiraling state deficit topping $61.4 billion in the first half of 2025. What might this fuel crisis mean for the future of Russian military engagements? As desperation set in, Russia faced an unsettling dilemma: sustain the war effort or appease its war-weary populace. And amid the chaos, ordinary Russians peeked into a future distorted by conflict, a price paid not just in currency but in their daily lives. Could the resolve of Ukrainians and the persistence of tactical innovation reshape the course of history? The answer loomed tantalizingly close, each drone strike echoing the heartfelt aspirations of a nation fighting for its survival. In recent months, Ukraine's strategy against Russia's oil infrastructure has reached a critical turning point. Between August 2 and August 24, Ukrainian forces unleashed attacks on Russian oil facilities a staggering 12 times. This aggressive campaign is not isolated. It represents a significant escalation from past operations, doubling the frequency of strikes compared to 2024's activities. The cumulative effect? An alarming drop in Russia's refining capabilities, with reports indicating a decline of up to 20%. The Independent noted that by August 25, 10 of Russia's oil refineries had been significantly impacted. This onslaught has not only led to widespread outages but is setting multiple facilities ablaze. The logic of Ukraine's approach is clear: more attacks translate to fewer operational refineries, which means less oil flowing into the market. However, there's more at play than just a numbers game. Shifting tactics, Ukraine is attacking not just once but repeatedly targeting the same refineries, preventing Russia from mending damages. Previously, after a refinery was struck, Ukraine would focus on different assets. Now, they strike, wait a few days, and then hit again. This persistent strategy is designed to create ongoing disruptions, leading to acute fuel shortages in Russia and its occupied territories. As a result, the ramifications are profound, with reports from the Kyiv Post indicating that Russia's fossil fuel processing had diminished from approximately 4.8 to 5 million barrels per day in July to between 4.5 and 4.7 million in August. This systematic targeting by Ukraine is successfully strangling Russia's oil supply, creating a crisis that impacts not only military operations but the everyday lives of ordinary Russians. Picture the tension in the air as queues of frustrated citizens stand outside empty gas stations, feeling the economic bite of a war that has now invaded their daily routines. But could this strategy backfire? What happens if the Kremlin decides to retaliate in a way that escalates the conflict even further? The stakes have never been higher, and the consequences of these actions could ripple through both nations, creating unforeseen challenges that neither side may be prepared to face. To recap, Russia's daily oil processing dipped from nearly 5 million barrels in July to around 4.6 million barrels in August. That slight decline might seem minor, but it's enough to trigger shortages all over Russia. And this is just the beginning. Ukraine's drone strikes on refineries are clearly making a dent. Expect these attacks to escalate, hitting the same targets more often. Russia appears powerless to stop this new form of pressure. Now, the term flying sanctions is more than a catchy phrase, it embodies Ukraine's daring tactic to cripple Russia's oil industry by direct assault. When the invasion began, the West and allies like Japan unleashed almost 24,000 sanctions on Russia. Such a massive campaign shows serious intent to choke Russia's war machine. Yet, these sanctions have a glaring flawed loopholes that let Russia's oil keep flowing to the world. Here's the shocker, while direct purchases of Russian oil are banned, no rules stopped other countries from buying Russian crude, refining it, and then selling the fuel onward. Nations like Turkey and India have become middlemen, quietly reselling Russian-origin fuel products to Europe and beyond. Russia uses a shadowy network of ships to ferry crude to these buyers, who then supply Western markets. This means the sanctions' teeth were dull from the start. Can you imagine the frustration behind Ukraine's bold move? Instead of just economic restrictions, they switched to targeted drone strikes that set refineries ablaze. The sound of distant explosions, the acrid scent of burning oil, and skies painted with smoke are now reminders of a new battleground. These strikes strike at the very heart of Russia's fuel supply, both for its military and civilian life. What happens next is chilling. With fuel supplies drying up and prices soaring, will Russia's oil trickle to its soldiers, or its own people? And if the shadow oil trade persists, can any sanction truly starve the war machine? The coming months promise blistering conflict, not just on land, but in refineries and fuel pumps stretching across Russia's vast lands. How long can this fragile balance hold before it shatters completely? In the swirling tides of international conflict, one would think that decisive actions, like sanctions, would swiftly cripple an adversary's economic backbone. Yet, amidst the fervor, an unexpected twist unfurls. The global narrative is shouting that sanctions against Russia should have decimated its oil industry. But as the world watches closely, the age-old principle of follow the money reveals a startling reality: Russia continues to sell a shocking amount of oil, outpacing expectations. However, a new chapter emerges from the heart of Ukraine, far beyond traditional sanctions. Enter the flying sanctions, a daring strategy that employs long-range drones to target vital Russian oil refineries. August proved to be a pivotal month as Ukrainian drones relentlessly struck these facilities, grinding Russia's oil production to a shocking halt. In a staggering new development, these aerial assaults are reshaping the balance of power, intensifying pressure on the Russian military and the nation's economy. Now, let's journey to Saratov, a key region along the Volga River, famed for its oil refinery critical to Russia's war and domestic fuel supply. As Ukraine's flying sanctions zeroed in on this essential infrastructure, the stakes couldn't be higher. On August 31, Ukraine launched a well-coordinated strike on the Kuibyshev refinery, which is pivotal for oil distillation. Russia insisted that the attacks were thwarted, claiming minor damages, yet vivid images of explosions and flames shared on social media tell a different story. With around 140,000 barrels processed each day, the Kuibyshev refinery accounts for about 2.5% of Russia's oil refining capacity. The implications of its disablement reverberated throughout the region. In nearby Samara, citizens began to experience an acute shortage of fuel. Gasoline pumps ran dry, and despair spread as lines for fuel stretched endlessly. What was once a thriving hub for millions now echoed with the sounds of frustration and uncertainty. As the true impact of Ukraine's flying sanctions began to reveal itself, fuel shortages across Russia became the norm. The Economist reported that these strikes could potentially affect 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity, crippling its ability to sustain both military efforts and everyday life. What was at stake? The struggle between providing for the military versus meeting civilian needs exposed a significant dilemma for the Kremlin. Yet, the desperation didn't stop at Russia's borders. In occupied territories like Luhansk, reports of fuel shortages began to emerge. Drones relentlessly targeted supply routes, thwarting Russia's logistical capabilities and sparking civil unrest. The destitution of vital resources transformed the military landscape, leaving even soldiers without necessary fuel for their vehicles. What does this say about the nature of international alliances? Ukraine's flying sanctions seem to highlight a growing disconnect between humanitarian support and global economic interests. As Ukraine attempts to thwart Russia's military operations, it finds itself in a peculiar position. Balancing its dire need for international support against an endless stream of oil purchases funding its enemy. Will Ukraine's bold strategy finally cause a rift deep enough to alter the course of this conflict? As the narrative unfolds, one thing remains certain: the outcome will shift the foundations of geopolitical alliances and redefine international approaches to warfare. With every drone strike, is Ukraine not only targeting oil but the very heart of a regime that thrives on fuel for power? The stakes couldn't be higher, and the world is watching, waiting for the next shocking twist in this high-stakes game. In the fierce battle for dominance in Eastern Europe, the stakes have dramatically shifted. Ukraine has launched an audacious strategy called flying sanctions, deploying long-range drones to destroy Russian oil refineries. This unexpected change has had a profound impact, causing significant fuel shortages within Russia and its occupied territories. Could this be the turning point that leads to the unraveling of Putin's power? As we delve deeper, we find that these flying sanctions, unlike traditional tactics, have accelerated the pain on the Russian economy more effectively than any Western sanctions over the last few years. A recent report highlighted a push by the US urging Europe to cease buying Russian oil. But with mounting evidence suggesting that the existing sanctions have limited impact due to loopholes and evasive maneuvers by the Kremlin, is it too late for a clean break? The reality is bleak for ordinary Russians as refined oil becomes increasingly scarce. Diesel and gasoline shortages plague fuel stations across the nation, leading to long queues and frustration. The very essence of daily life is being felt acutely by those who once took such resources for granted. Imagine the anxious sounds of car engines idling, the acrid smell of burning oil in the air, and the palpable tension brewing among the population. The Ukrainian strategy seems almost surgical, targeting the heart of Russia's energy supply. On the ground, residents of major industrial regions like Samara are reeling from these shortages. With vital facilities like the Kuibyshev oil refinery incapacitated, Russia's ability to sustain its military efforts is now under serious threat. Reports indicate that public sentiment is shifting. As the prices soar and resources dwindle, dissatisfaction is soaring among the populace. What will happen as this discontent grows? The chaos doesn't stop there. Beyond the immediate effects of flying sanctions, the ramifications are pressing in critical regions like Luhansk and occupied territories. Long lines for fuel and empty gas pumps symbolize a regime in turmoil, echoing sentiments from the past, the echoes of old Soviet-era scarcity. Against this backdrop, the specter of a regime at war with itself looms large. Can Putin maintain control even as his strategies unravel? As we trace this unfolding drama, the conflict continues. Ukraine's determined strikes are causing unprecedented turmoil within the Russian economy. Traditional sanctions have failed, overshadowed by the effectiveness of Ukraine's approach. Russia is potentially at a breaking point. The impact of these flying sanctions opens a door to momentous changes. Will the internal complications lead to a shift in power dynamics, or will Putin's regime withstand the pressure? Join us as we explore this remarkable situation that might just change the course of a war and reshape the future of Eastern Europe, igniting hope amidst the chaos. The question remains, can the winds of change blow strongly enough to topple a regime that seems so firmly entrenched? Previously, we saw how Ukraine's relentless drone strikes, its so-called flying sanctions, are only just beginning to cut deep into Russia's oil supply. Fuel shortages creeping across cities, gas stations running dry, prices soaring sky-high. But the crisis in Russia is about to spiral far beyond just empty pumps. Beneath the surface, a deadly internal storm is raging. What if the biggest threat to Putin's regime isn't from the outside, but from within? A brutal power struggle has exploded between Russia's security agency, the FSB, and the country's top military commanders. Once allies, these factions now clash with ruthless intensity, each trying to assert control over the shattered war effort and the nation's future. Imagine the echoes of secret meetings turning into accusations, whispers morphing into open confrontations, brother against brother in a fight for survival. The Kremlin's foundation, already shaken by sanctions and battlefield failures, is now cracking under the weight of its own internal chaos. Could this bitter infighting ignite the collapse of the entire regime? While Ukraine's drones burn through oil refineries thousands of miles away, within Russia's shadowy corridors of power, a war for Russia's soul has taken hold. Will Putin's hold on power snap like a brittle thread? Or can the regime still pull itself back from the abyss? The answer could reshape the fate of a nation and the future of the Ukraine conflict. Stay with us as we uncover the explosive battle tearing Russia apart and the chilling possibility that this internal war might be the final blow to a crumbling empire.